One of the biggest challenges that face any brand owner or product developer is what are you trying to solve? And the consumer perceptions are often inconsistent, and sometimes they're perceptions and not reality.
Hi everyone, welcome to another recording of Tenzing's Experts Uncut. Glad to introduce here with me today Farquhar Ogilvie. Thank you, Farquhar, for coming on. I appreciate your time.
You're very welcome. Delighted to be here.
So I regard Farquhar in our network as an absolute expert in packaging with a deep focus as it's relevant to a lot of our clients in sustainable packaging. Farquhar, I'll give a background, has 32 years in various packaging leadership roles across Procter Gamble, or P&G as the acronym goes. It's one of the world's largest and most successful FMCG or CPG companies. Farquhar has a degree in chemical engineering, one of the, next to physics, one of the most complex undergrads you can ever do, from the University of Exeter. And he's a sought out thought leader in our network and beyond on the topic of sustainable packaging. So really excited to deep dive into that topic with you today. So thank you. Let's go back to grassroots and just start at the beginning. How did you get into packaging?
Really, as a consequence of P&G's choices on how it's structured. Much of the consumer-facing part of the company is organized in business units. Fabric care, and baby care, beauty care, etc. But some of the functions where I was located were in procurement, worked across those business units, and so you had a much more industry-wide scope of your responsibilities, and indeed, as you were able to connect externally and internally, you can take ideas, spread them between business units, create scale that perhaps you couldn't if you were just looking at one business unit. And the sustainability side came as a consequence of consumer interest. It's the way things were going, and so therefore it was a very obvious place for me to spend time and interest.
And we were chatting before as well when we first met around the time that you spent in Switzerland as well. Was that purely a P&G decision, and how long were you there for?
Yes, it was, became P&G's European headquarters from about 2000, which is when I moved there, and was there for well, on and off for 15 years. I had about a 5-year stint in Cincinnati, where the corporate headquarters are. And so it was really more a choice of the company for me to be located in Switzerland, rather than it being a particular center for packaging.
Okay. And Switzerland, for those that know, outside of financial services, really is somewhat of a hub for pretty creative product development. Is there any history behind that? How that came about? I mean, a reason that P&G perhaps moved there may have been tax related, possibly, but they were one of the big firms that really created such a major push around product development globally. Any insight from your time there?
Well, I mean, certainly the company has a strong focus on R&D, and starts with what are the consumer challenges or problems that they need to be fixed, and then there is a significant amount of effort goes into understanding those problems and how they appear in people's lives at home. And then there's a very considerable organization focused on trying to address those problems. And indeed, a lot of the capability that the company looks to bring to address challenges is external capability, the capability that exists in companies of all sorts around the world, and no less so than packaging companies around the world.
Okay. So some of the challenges, obviously, that our clients are going through, and companies that you're advising on a regular basis, are very specific to to sustainability, right? There's just a constantly changing, I'd hate to say that, but constantly changing and somewhat complex regulatory environment from a target standpoint. So just being aware of all the changing regulations is kind of challenge number one. Challenge number two is competing with other companies, especially ones the size of P&G and other major players in the CPG space, of how to meet those regulations while everyone else is competing to do the same thing. COP28 was recently held. That annual. Is it annual? It's an annual conference in at least
Pretty much, but I couldn't swear to the reality that every year for the last 28 there has been a COP.
So this year it was in Dubai. Fantastic location, but all the focus was around carbon reduction and emission reduction. But was there any talk of packaging specifically? Any kind of insights from that? I mean, that was only a week or 2 weeks ago, so relatively hot topic.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, certainly one of the things that stood out was that the WPO, World Packaging Organization, took to the podium and had various sessions with panels and so forth. And I think that's actually a very important development. Europe is known to be quite a enthusiastic regulator, let's say, and to that end provides a great deal of important consistency when you look at different markets. And for multinationals, consistency across different regulatory geographies is really important. So the WPO stepping up is a real help, because this will help whatever standards are being developed and adopted be more consistent around the world. And one of the biggest challenges that face any brand owner or product developer is, what are you trying to solve? And the consumer perceptions are often inconsistent, and sometimes they're perceptions and not reality. And so if you're trying to hit too many different targets, you end up failing to actually make any progress. And I would actually say quite an important part of my role, or the sort of role that I played in some of the businesses, was to help take real life available choices to the brand owners and business leaders and say, choose A or choose B. These are both available now. We can go ahead and do it. Because often what comes in a question from either from consumers or just a direction that the brand would like to go tends to get confused between what's recyclable, what's recycled, what's reuse, what's recycled content, and the definitions of those are something that the WPO or the EU through the PPWD, which is the Packaging Waste Directive in Europe. So they can provide a definition. Now, you can always argue, is it the correct and best definition? But a definition that is adopted in a wide environment is extremely helpful to provide the sort of consistency that you need to develop a solution to a problem.
Yeah, I think one thing, when you and I have chatted with clients in the past, that really opened my eyes was just in the complexity in the packaging supply chain and value chain end to end, when these questions come out around sustainability. So for a non-expert like myself in this particular topic, I would see the target, the regulatory target under the EU Green Deal of the percentage of products that need to be recycled by, I think, end of 2025. That was like the last, target date. In my mind, I'm like, okay, well, you just need to find recycled products. And you're like, no, it's a little bit more difficult than that. One is, what is the definition of recycled? Where is that recycled material actually coming from? Is it coming from the ocean? Is it controlled recycled home products? Who are the providers, right? What kind of certifications do they have? Can you actually track the credibility behind the recycled stamp on the products that you're purchasing, and truly understanding the source supply chain for that is challenge number one. The other one you'd highlighted, and maybe you can go in a bit more depth on it, is in competition, right? So if every CPG and FMCG company has got the same target, they're going to the biggest providers that have the largest capacity and are the most well known at the same time, and they're having to shift, ultimately their whole manufacturing process based on the demands of their biggest suppliers, and that's not something that happens overnight, right? So it's very complex in how you explained it to me that beyond just the statement that the EU might throw out from a regulatory standpoint, but it drives innovation. It pushes those companies to meet the customers' demands and ultimately creates change, right? Which is the whole intent behind a target. But anything else that you've learned from that, in how easy it is to kind of for these main manufacturers to meet that demand, or is everyone still trying to figure it out?
Well, I think everybody's still trying to figure it out to some degree, and in part that's because the regulations are still evolving and changing, and they in themselves are quite complex. When you look at, for example, the idea of reuse, there are 8 different points of definition for what reuse means, or if a product is reusable. But there's 2 things I would particularly point about recycled content specifically. The first is to your point of competition. So if you are looking at a package made of PET, which is very common and certainly the largest segment when you look at the drinks market, but it's also something used in the FMCG world. And you find it for shampoos, for example. Well, clearly, if the big brand owners, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, if they make a choice to go from 25% recycled content to 35% recycled content, which is a meaningful change in the scale of the supply chain, but not necessarily the ultimate goal that consumers would want, because they would want to see something much higher. But that can be huge. And suddenly you can find that sucking up all the available material and driving prices to a place that, maybe a major shampoo owner might be able to compete and secure some supply, but a lot of smaller brands won't be able to compete anymore. So that becomes, extremely challenging. So the importance of having long lead times in when you need to see, higher percentages of recycled content is very important to allow the supply chain to evolve such that you get the largest degree of compliance. There's no point setting a goal of let's move everybody to 90% tomorrow if nobody can actually do it. You then just degrade and devalue the point of that target. But arguably, I would say the more important side of it is that you create demand for recycled content. In many parts of the world, say particularly Asia, the biggest environmental issue with packaging is simply collection. A lot of it just ends up in the rivers and the oceans to, devastating effect. We've all seen the pictures of turtles and plastic or straws and so forth. So if you create demand, that puts a value on the waste plastic, which in turn will lead to people developing ways of collecting it. And yes, initially some of that may get shipped to Europe, where people are prepared to pay a higher price for that. But if it triggers collection, you're getting a massive benefit on the impact on the environment of packaging, in my example, in Asia.
Okay. Love it. So is there then, if you're not a big name brand, right, you're in the top 10 name brand FMCG, CPG companies in the world who are likely already working on this, your recommendation is for the mid-market or kind of smaller brands, maybe more regional ones, to take note in order to just even secure their own capacity, because the end of 2025 seems a long way off. But if you're looking at changing suppliers, restructuring your supply chain, setting demands, forward buying, particular materials, or having your key suppliers forward by those particular materials, and then you're committing to certain purchase order volumes, that's not that far away, right? That's a process that, if you haven't already kicked off, is something that should have happened, ASAP, right?
Yeah, in many instances, if you've not already got the supply secured, you're probably too late. Now, the industry is evolving, and you have a number of different segments to it. To some degree, when you think about where does this material come from, it comes from what consumers throw away in the previous weeks. So the supply side right from the get-go can be very variable. It can depend on seasonal factors. If it's very hot at one part of the year, more drinks are sold. You might get more PET packaging in your recycling. You might get more salad packs. Barbecues generate people buying meat in trays, and so forth. So it does depend on the kind of variability of supply right into the beginning of the system. What's happening further down the chain is you're now starting to see companies who are trading, buying and selling either intermediate or kind of direct replacements to virgin pellets of plastic that would go to the packaging manufacturer. So you're getting people start to get organized, and the business value driven, as I was mentioning a minute ago, by demand is stimulating people to get organized, which is in turn is then creating a more responsive supply chain. So whilst you're in that process of evolving towards ever higher targets, the industry will likely be lagging and chasing to catch up. It will be catching up. And the more demand you create, the more that industry will generate supply to meet that demand.
Okay. Super fascinating. Seriously, the level of depth that your background is super impressive. What I'd love to do, and I don't want to get your commitment on recording, but I kind of am. I'd love to try and make this some type of annual reflection, right? That we do. We have you on talking about the kind of the evolving, changing targets after COP28, or if there's any other key conferences throughout the year, and update on how the market from a supply perspective is playing catch up, because this is just moving very fast, and something that we see from a consumer standpoint evolving quickly, but I can just imagine that it's an ongoing maturity migration that's happening behind the scenes, all the way along the value chain. So just every 2 to 3 months I can see changes in targets, and new suppliers battling and achieving new targets and everything else. So it'd be a good topic to do a refresh on later, if you're up for it.
Yes, certainly, and it is a constantly changing environment, in part because there are new innovations coming up, there are new solutions to problems appearing, and the timeframes that are already built into the directives that will become regulation, which is a change that's happening with the latest PPWD, is that won't be a directive anymore; it'll be a regulation, and that's changing. And by its nature, in trying to be comprehensive, it is incredibly complex. So you could actually repeat on a weekly cycle, just treating one area and saying, right, what's the time frames? What are the changes that have to be met? And who's having to meet them? Is this the responsibility of individual governments or municipal organizations? Is this something primarily that's going to impact retailers? Or is this going to be something the brand owners need to take on board as something for them to address? And indeed, the packaging industry and so on and so forth. So it does, different regulations impact different groups, and there are very different sets of timetables for each of the components of recycled content, reusable, recyclable, and indeed different for different types of packaging, whether it's paper packaging, metal packaging, glass, or plastic. So there is a lot there that we can get into. We would need to start putting charts to try and simplify some of the stuff. I think me just talking through, the difference between 2024 goal, 2025 goal, for each of the different components, I'm not sure would make the most fascinating of talks. So a few simplifications might be necessary.
Yeah, well, I mean, it has direct impact on revenues in certain regions, right? I mean, it's not just a chasing of regulatory demands to avoid fines. I think, a lot of these major FMCG companies are wanting to have options available so that they don't lose market share, in critical areas. And it definitely is more consumer driven, I think, in Europe. But the US is playing catch up pretty quickly, right? I mean, I've seen,
oh sure,
yeah, the reusable plastic bags, right? They're at least having available plastic bags in grocery stores in the UK. When I was last back there, 10 years ago, that kind of regulation was put in place almost overnight, and it's starting to happen here, although albeit a decade later, and very state driven, right, where it's implemented in certain locations faster than others, but it's still happening. So I think the innovation that Europe is doing, the new goals that they're setting, and the changes and the restructuring the supply chain are going to have a positive impact around the world, and they're almost taking the lead, which I think is great.
I mean, actually, the kind of sustainable packaging world in the US is alive and thriving.
Okay, great.
And primarily that's for the same reasons as what led to this. In Europe, which is this is what the consumers expect of their products. And in the end, if you're not meeting those needs, then they will simply buy another product. So there is many people, even within the corporate world, have a deep passion and interest in doing what's right, in doing what's right for the environment, and in doing what's right for consumers. It's not just about chasing profit or avoiding a fine, although those can sometimes give you clear metrics which can help you with getting decisions made. But like all of these things, it starts with the consumer. You find out what they want, truly understand what they want, and then help them with a product that better meets their needs.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, I just really appreciate your time, Farquhar. Thank you. You know more about this topic than anyone that I've ever chatted with, and it's fascinating to learn every time we chat, and I can see the passion in your eyes. So I appreciate the time. We'll wrap up here. Thank you again. Happy holidays, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. I look forward to it.